Buildings breathe. So anytime a door is opened, there's actually pressure that will cause air to flow into the house. And basically, a house breathes from the ground up through the roof. And so anytime a door is opened, that outside air comes in, and outside air always contains mold spores. So if people have the idea that there should be no mold in my home whatsoever, that's a misconception. What we want to do is if we find mold growing, we want to identify the source. We want to find out why it's there. What do we need to do to get rid of it? And what do we need to do to keep it from coming back? All with the understanding that there will be mold spores re entering into the environment. All right. So this is episode number 2 in relation to mold remediation. And it's a fairly complex topic. I felt like taking a couple podcasts to talk about it would be the best way that we can get the knowledge out there in a way that is digestible for those who are interested in maybe doing this down the road someday, or those of you who are just looking for information on how this works. Happy to share the knowledge that we have, obviously. In review from the former episode, we had talked about containment. We talked about personal protective equipment, the importance of a company being hired that knows how to do remediation, that's insured. There's a lot that goes into the starting phase of a mold remediation project. And I emphasized also the importance of making sure that water is removed from the environment and that we're being proactive versus reactive. Before I move on to these final steps here, I would point out that many times we have phone calls from people who are getting ready to sell their property, or even real estate agents who want to have us come out, take a look, give them an idea of what it costs to remove the mold. And many times, unfortunately, when we get into those situations, it's not as easy to provide the upfront re, the upfront service that says they're requesting from us to just remove the mold. And as I mentioned in the first episode, the reason why that is not doable is because if the proper steps are not taken regarding the context of this property, the water intrusion, the way that it's dried out on a regular basis, if those steps are not taken, then we're really not doing a service to the public and that, related to mold remediation on the market. So we tend to not offer that level of mold remediation. Basically, if it can't be done right, we don't want to have a part of that ourselves within our company. And the reason I say is because we go off of an industry standard. It wasn't developed by me. It wasn't developed by our company. It was developed by a group of biologists and scientists and industry leading professionals that really pulled the asbestos remediation into the mold remediation. And so when we're taught how to do this, it's very much similar to asbestos remediation. We can get into a topic on that down the road as well, in another podcast. But anyway, in review, that was where we've been. I talked about HEPA vacuuming the entire contained area. Once we've done that, we actually spray a biocide mold inhibitor. What we use, it's known as chlorine dioxide, and it's food grade. It's actually used even in water purification. So they're within chlorine dioxide, it has all the properties to clean and sanitize, but it does not carry with it the harmful effects that some things do on humans. So that's the reason we choose to use that one. And once we've applied that and sprayed it, we wipe it down everywhere. Everything is wiped down. So it's HEPA vacuumed, it's wiped down. And then we actually had HEPA vacuum a second time if it's needed and if it was a severe area. Once those things are done, there's any wood that was still that we left in that wasn't torn out, we actually seal the wood. And that prevents mold spores from being able to penetrate into the wood itself. then down the road if there were to be more water introduced to the environment for whatever reasons. And once that's done, we actually also do a process that's known as air washing. Many times that'll be done in the rest of the home where there wasn't a mold problem. And the reason we do that is to be proactive. So air washing is we use a wet fogger that aerosolizes the chlorine dioxide, and it's like a blower. And so we can aerosolize chlorine dioxide throughout the home, spraying all the materials in the house. It doesn't stain, doesn't leave any residue. It's completely safe. When it dries, it's gone. It just leaves it smelling clean and fresh. And so that's something else that is added into this process. Once that's done, then we do a full air duct cleaning of the home. We get into the system, the trunk lines, the supply lines, the return lines. Those are all thoroughly cleaned with a negative air pressure air duct cleaning unit that we bring in. And then we always recommend a post-inspection mold report that will compare the starting level of spores to the final level. And we always see that level drop significantly. And the final thing I would say that I started talking about earlier in the first episode, I started talking about, you know, just the health issues related to mold in general. And we always recommend people go to a doctor if they're concerned, because a lot of times what will happen is we get a phone call and it's a potential client that says that they've been getting sick in their home. They did notice some mold growing and they want to know, can you tell us, is this something that is related to the mold? And the answer is probably yes. It may not be the only factor, but it sure doesn't help you any to have that growing. But beyond that, we always recommend that you go see a doctor to find out if there are adverse issues going on here. You know, that post inspection though, what I want to point out from that is also this case, and that is in the biological world that we live in, mold is present everywhere. And we always want to help the clients that we work with, or those of you who might be in this industry, understand that expectations have to be set properly. And the most important thing that we can point out beyond being proactive to keep the water out, a lot of times that requires foundation work. A lot of times it requires some work on the ground outside to get a negative slope, backfilling sometimes. But beyond that, what else is important to understand about mold is that it does get reintroduced into the home, and buildings breathe. So anytime a door is opened, there's actually pressure that will cause air to flow into the house. And basically a house breathes from the ground up through the roof. And so anytime a door is opened, that outside air comes in, and outside air always contains mold spores. So if people have the idea that there should be no mold in my home whatsoever, that's a misconception. What we want to do is, if we find mold growing, we want to identify the source. We want to find out why it's there. What do we need to do to get rid of it? And what do we need to do to keep it from coming back? All with the understanding that there will be mold spores re-entering into the environment. That's why we seal. That's why we take these additional steps. Where people get confused at times, and that's just probably related to the market, or just, I don't know if it's TV commercials or just the common thing that sometimes people get an idea of the way things are. And if mold remediation is done, you expect the final count to be 0. That's never going to happen. What we want to do though, is when we do the inspections, is we do an outside sampling. It tells us about the mold spore count outside, and then we do indoor samplings in the affected areas, then areas where it's not affected. And we also recommend doing air samples right at the point where the return pulls air into the unit for the AC and the heat. And that tells us how much basically the lungs of the house are pulling in and then pushing out for the rest of the house. So you always want to approach it with these facts in mind. We are happy to give consultation. We do free estimates. And really, mold remediation starts with educating yourself, with education regarding the nature of mold. And then going from there, how do we address it? And then setting proper expectations. And that is to say, we want to see that mold count go down from the initial inspection. Like, let's say the initial inspection was 20,000 mold spores in this one area, and we get done doing it and it's inspected and there's less than 2,000. That's a sign of a really good mold remediation when the outside air may have only contained 10,000 or say maybe less than it originally was inside. And those factors all go into play. And then we know based on the steps that were followed, based on everything that was done, we can guarantee that if everything is followed as we recommend and we keep the water out, there will no longer ever be any mold growth whatsoever within that environment. And we can guarantee that for lifetime for any client that would call us. So there you have it. Mold remediation from Enviro-Dry cleaning and restoration. Appreciate those of you who watch this and tune in for more things down the road.